Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about secure WordPress plugin development. Almost every plugin vulnerability that our threat intel team here at Wordfence finds boils down to 3 avoidable mistakes. So stick around to find out how to make your plugin more secure. We're going to talk about these 3 mistakes at length so that you can avoid them in the future. We'll be right back to get started. Welcome to another edition of Wordfence Live. Today's October 13th. We're inching closer to Halloween and getting pretty excited. Let us know what you're going to be doing this Halloween. Let us know your favorite Halloween activity. Mine, of course, is eating Halloween candy. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. In a few moments, I'm going to be joined by QA engineer and threat analyst Ram Gall, as well as Chloe Chamberlain, threat analyst. You've seen a lot from them lately if you've been checking out the blog or the mailing list. In today's episode of Wordfence Live, we have a good one. We're going to be talking about 3 things that you're going to want to do to avoid vulnerabilities in your WordPress plugin. So this episode is going to be a little more geared towards developers, though there's going to be takeaways that can help all of us be more secure and knowledgeable with regard to security going forward. So be sure to stick around and ask some questions if you're not sure. Now, as for these 3 things that you're going to want to do to avoid vulnerabilities in your plugins, you might be wondering how a plugin author might be introducing vulnerabilities in their plugins. And today that's something that we're going to talk about with regard to these vulnerabilities and how to avoid doing it for plugin authors. You're going to be hearing these 3 things from, as I mentioned, Chloe and Ram, who are very good at finding these in plugins. We just had a big vulnerability we're going to talk about right off the bat here. And they're going to be talking about the process of how they find these. So if you're subscribed to that newsletter or the blog, you're seeing this stuff come out frequently, and these 2 are very good at it. We're going to be bringing them in just a moment. If you're new to WordPress, if you're new to Wordfence, you're in the right place. Maybe you just are getting started. Last week we talked about that. We've had some really good streams lately. So if you're just getting a site going, if you're just getting started with something, you can go back and check out those streams and figure out where to start a good secure foundation for your site. So feel free to check out the YouTube channel here and get a look at those videos. Now, Wordfence is the #1 choice for securing WordPress sites. Currently, we're protecting well over 3 million sites worldwide. If you're excited about today's stream and content, hit the like button below the video here, and we'll be sure to make more similar content going forward. It's very helpful for us to know what you want to see. You can also hit the subscribe button if you have not already. You can hit the bell and be notified when we go live in the future. Typically, we're live every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific, so keep an eye out there. We're broadcasting to YouTube, so watch what you post in the chat, and we do our best to moderate it. If you have anything sensitive or specific to your site, maybe your site's compromised, you might want to reach out to us about that at feedback@wordfence.com, and you can use the subject line Wordfence Live there. So let's get started. Let's bring in QA engineer, threat analyst Ram Gall, as well as threat analyst Chloe Chamberlain. How's it going, Ram?
This is the first weekend where this past weekend has been the first weekend where it's been under 100 degrees where I am, but I guess it's already going to creep back up. So yeah, it's Arizona.
Chloe, how's it going?
Things are going good here.
So you had a pretty big post come out last week, right?
Yep.
Now, what did you find there? That was the WP Bakery, am I remembering correctly?
Yeah. So basically, it allowed contributor-level users and authors to exploit XSS vulnerability, so they were able to inject malicious JavaScripts and posts. So WordPress has capabilities, and one of the capabilities that administrators and editors have is unfiltered HTML. So basically, editors and admins can put as much HTML or JavaScript in posts as they want, but that is actually disabled for contributor and author level users. But with WP Bakery, it disabled that filtering, which should be enabled. So they were able to inject malicious JavaScript and posts, and then that could execute in an administrator's browser or even a user's browser if the post ended up getting published. Yeah, and there was a couple other small things in there, like you could edit other users' posts, and there were short codes that you could inject XSS in and stuff. So it was mostly XSS and just a couple other small things in there.
Now that affected over 4 million sites. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah.
How did you come across that? Was it were you looking for a while? Were you just using the plugin? How does something like that get found?
Yeah, so I basically just took the plugin and I wanted to do an audit on it. So one of the things I like to check with the page builders is checking specifically to see if contributor level users or author level users can do certain things that they shouldn't be able to. So it was basically just me manipulating the pages and stuff and seeing what I could do. And I found that you can, so basically WP Bakery had editing disabled on post with the WP Bakery page builder. So technically, contributors at the beginning were not supposed to be able to access a page builder at all. However, there was a bypass to get there, and then so you could use the whole page builder for posts. And that's basically how I figured out everything. And then from there, I looked at the code and figured out exactly what was wrong.
Very cool. So yeah, we're posting the link into the comment section there. So go ahead and take a look if you haven't seen it already. Now, before we get into the content today, we have another swag giveaway. And we are going to be posting another form for that for you to go over. So you're going to want to get your guess in quick. The question for today is, what does Nonce stand for? So you're going to click on the form over there that we're posting into the chat, and the first 5 correct guesses will win the free swag there. And I'm not even sure what we're giving away today, so it is a mystery. Perhaps we do believe we have a picture of some of our somebody who had won some swag. There we go. That's adorable. They have the blue and black theme going on for Wordfence too. Really cool. So yeah, if you win some swag, I know we've sent out quite a bit lately. If you win anything, feel free to send a picture in and we'll get it out there. But without further ado, let's jump into it. What's first? Who wants to take it? Ram, Chloe?
I do want to point out that it looks like someone has already answered the question in the chat. So we're probably going to have to probably going to have to cover what it's used for if you want to win swag and not just the literal definition. So we're going to cover the top 3 causes of vulnerabilities, or the top 3 things we find that almost always can be exploited in WordPress plugins, but they also apply to pretty much any sort of, web-based software development in general. It's just that, the functions we're going to talk about specifically are going to be WordPress specific. So start with number 1, and this is honestly the biggest thing that we really see cause problems, and that is always check capabilities. Like, Chloe, I think you'd agree with me on this, that, and you already mentioned it with the, the WP Bakery thing, but in just about every vulnerability we found, a capability check would have either diminished the severity of the vulnerability or would have diminished the severity of the vulnerability, no matter how bad it was otherwise.
Yeah, I think capability checks are like that's pretty much the source of almost all vulnerabilities out there. Missing those,
at least in WordPress and a lot of web applications. Yeah. And so here's the thing. WordPress uses something referred to as a role-based access control. And that means that every user is assigned a role. So, if you start making your site from scratch, you automatically get assigned a role called administrator. But let's say you want someone to write articles for your site. You might want to assign them a contributor or an author role, depending on how much you trust them. If you don't trust them to, publish articles without you reviewing them first, you might just give them a contributor role. If you do trust them to publish articles, then, maybe put them at an author, and someone you trust to, edit those articles, but maybe not to change your site settings, you give them an editor role. So each role is allowed to do certain things, we call those things capabilities. And Chloe, you mentioned the unfiltered HTML capability, but I think there's a number of others that we usually see pretty frequently.
Yeah, there's all sorts of capabilities. There's going to be like edit post, edit others post. Oh gosh, there's so many. Create users, all sorts of things like that. And each of those capabilities basically says that the person can do a certain thing. So, for example, edit post, you can edit posts. Create users, you can create users. So all those are capabilities, and each role is going to have a different set of capabilities that they're able to do.
Yep, and I think one of the ones that we see most often, at least as like a stand-in for administrative users, is one called Manage Options. Just because some sites might have like multi-site installation where they've got a super administrator, or maybe you want to set up a special account that has some administrative permissions. But not others. So a lot of the time we'll see manage options being the capability used to check whether or not someone's supposed to be able to change things. That's sort of a stand-in for administrative capability checks. So like the good news is that like you don't have to do this in every single function. Like let's say you've got an Ajax function that takes user input and processes it and then does something depending on what gets sent to it. You can have one capability check for that function, and then as long as there's no other way to get to the other functions, that's fine. But we'll actually get to this in number 3. But yes, it's better safe than sorry. Capability checks don't take a lot of overhead, and stick them anywhere anything is changed or anything sensitive is viewed. So, Chloe, do you want to get into some of the mistakes we frequently see cause vulnerabilities as far as capability checks? Like what kind of functions we'll usually see that should have them but don't?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like commonly we see a lot of vulnerabilities that think something that has admin in it protects against capabilities. Basically, you would think that admin would mean admin, but it only means admin, like as in the dashboard area, so WP admin. So some of the common things we see is, for example, Ajax actions will be missing capability checks with those. Subscriber level users can execute any Ajax actions. So you need to make sure that you have a specific capability check there. Admin post is another one that you should make sure that you have a capability check with that. And then you have the WP Ajax no privs. So that means that there's no privileges needed to execute those Ajax actions. So sometimes we see sensitive functions that are tied to these Ajax actions that actually don't require any privileges at all. So any user unauthenticated can execute them. It's important to make sure that you're not using those Ajax actions for things that are sensitive. And then you have admin init, so like admin underscore INIT. Those also can be executed by anyone as long as they have access to the WP admin. And I believe those are also executable if you just do like admin post in some cases. And so you can still do some of those unauthenticated as well. It's just making sure that the request is coming from what looks like an admin area. And then you have is admin as well, which sounds like it would be, are you an admin? But technically this is just checking again for the WP admin dashboard. So anyone logged in like a subscriber can execute those functions. And Ram, what should we do to correct these mistakes?
So here's the thing, just having those, just using those isn't bad on its own. The problem is don't use any of those as their own capability checks. Like if, let's say you've got admin in it, starting up a function, whatever that function does, add a separate capability check to it. I'm actually going to share a little bit of a code snippet to show you what an admin post looks like. let's see, it was...
I see we have a question from Tom here. Are these vulnerabilities because the programmer exposed them, or are they vulnerable because of WordPress defaults?
So they're vulnerable because the programmer didn't use the tools that WordPress gives you to control access. So it's true that closed by default would be more secure than open by default, and to some extent, yes, that is something that's you're going to see in a lot of web applications. But having some form of access control is something you're also going to run into with all web applications. And I think the main problem is that plugins give authors a lot of flexibility in how they want to, implement functionality, and especially if you're just starting out, because, most plugin developers who've been at it for a while won't make these mistakes, though they may have made these mistakes in the past. And sometimes we'll find legacy code that just hasn't been cleaned up from a popular plugin. But this is especially important if you're just starting out. Is to just be aware of this, because who knows, that new plugin you're writing today from scratch, it might be your first or second plugin. If you don't remember to do this, you might forget to add access control further down the road, and then we might find the vulnerabilities in your plugin. So yeah, so that was
definitely a good thing to avoid.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't really talk about what I showed on the screen, but that was an example of, an admin post vulnerability, which again, just like admin Ajax, sounds like something only an administrator should do, but admin post can actually be accessed even if the user's not logged in, if there's a no priv, and by subscriber users if there isn't. So yeah, it's... just about every other vulnerability can at least be like diminished in impact by adding access control. And even for things like, cross-site scripting or something, you don't want to stop all cross-site scripting in all situations, or all JavaScript adding in all situations, because administrators should be able to add JavaScript to their sites. So you want to make sure that people who are allowed to do those things can do those things. Administrators should be able to, upload files. So you want to make sure that you're checking that the person who's trying to do the thing is allowed to do the thing, not necessarily block all instances of the thing they're trying to do.
Yeah, and sort of what you started with, that goes back to just general WordPress security, making sure that you're not giving out the ability for people to do things that they shouldn't be. Don't make everybody an administrator. Similar here with not giving that sort of access to everybody into a plugin, and you'll avoid these issues. Now, I'm sure, with as far as checking capabilities, we've probably had many vulnerabilities that we've found relating to this mistake, right?
Yeah. The some that we could list recently are, the WP database reset plugin, which I think was found by Chloe, import export WordPress users, which I think was also another Chloe find. This one I did a few months ago in the pop-up builder plugin. That also could have been stopped if they'd had proper capability checking. And I mean, in some cases, the capability checking is there, it's just not used correctly. Let me see. I think one of these was actually kind of interesting for that. Was it the import export WordPress users one? I feel like that was the one where they checked if WooCommerce was installed and only did a capability check if WooCommerce was present.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, let me see if I can do a screen share on that particular one. Like if you take a look. All right, see, it'll actually check to see if WooCommerce is installed, and it did a capability check if WooCommerce was installed, but it didn't actually do any capability checks unless WooCommerce was installed. So that was kind of, not great.
And I think it was one of those plugins that was like initially designed to only be used with WooCommerce, and then I think they kind of went with a more general branding so that like anybody could import and export users. So I think when it made that transition, it might have just got overlooked.
Yeah, it's at least a couple of the things, that, I've found recently have been, cases where, the developer left some legacy code base in place. And even though their new code was secure, the legacy code wasn't. And because the legacy code wasn't and it was still accessible, and actually we'll get to this in number 3 as well, it could still be exploited. So, yeah, not so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do we have anything else to show for that, or should we move on to the second mistake here?
Honestly, I think we should move on to the second mistake because it's going to require some background, a lot more background than I think, some people are, familiar with. And we mentioned nonces. So our second thing is make sure to always use and check nonces. And I don't know if have we talked about CSRF vulnerabilities lately, Chloe?
Not lately, but a while back we did CSRF Scott. So.
Oh yeah, okay.
How could I forget?
I mean, I didn't get CSRF'd, but
not yet.
Not yet. Not
Give it
that
time.
I know of.
You are right now, maybe.
Maybe I am right now, and I just don't know it.
Yeah. So basically, cross-site request forgery is when you are forging a request on behalf of an administrator. So, or it could be lower level users as well. But basically, an attacker can craft a request and they can trick an administrator or another user into executing an action like clicking on a link, opening an attachment, or something like that that is going to actually send a request on behalf of the administrator and take the cookies. So they have to be logged into the site too at the same time. So basically, for this to be successful, an administrator, for example, needs to be logged into their WordPress site, and then they need to click on a link set by an attacker. And then in the background, what's happening is a request is being sent from the link they clicked or whatever happens there, being sent, and it's taking the cookies from the session already established by the administrator that's logged into their site, and it's tying it in with that request, and then it's basically sending it successfully. And I think that, does that make sense for him?
Yeah, I think so. So basically what you're getting at is if, let's say I'm an administrator and I'm logged into a site and there's a button I can press that will make someone else an administrator, or like a link that I can click. If you as an attacker know exactly how that link, what that link will send, you can, send me a copy of that link in an email and get me to click it. And it'll basically do the same thing as if I had clicked it inside the WordPress interface, right?
Yeah, exactly.
At least if we don't use nonces.
Yep.
So basically it's a way to prevent, administrators from accidentally clicking something that would normally be legitimately in the interface, but something that the attacker would control instead. So if I'm logged into my bank and you send me a link to transfer you $100,000, but disguise it as something else, I'm not going to actually transfer you $100,000. I don't have $100,000. Yeah.
Dang it.
Anyways,
Maybe another time.
One day. Yeah, so that's what cross-site request forgery is. And the reason we use nonces is basically, as someone did mention already, it is a number used once. I mean, realistically, it's used once per session. But basically, WordPress comes up with, or whatever you're using, comes up with a random value. Let's say the nonce is ABC123, which is a terrible, very predictable nonce. But WordPress comes up with that nonce and puts it on the page where you click the link. And automatically submits the nonce along with your request. And then in the background, once you send that request, it checks, hey, is the nonce they sent over the same one that we actually put on that page? And if it's not, then the attacker, then the attacker can't predict what the nonce is going to be. They don't actually have access to view that page, so they can't figure out what the nonce should be, unless they're, yeah, there's ways that can be gotten around, but it involves a lot of cryptography, and I don't think that there's any real world attacks in most cases. But yeah, am I making sense with this, Chloe? I feel like
Yeah, completely.
okay, cool. But yeah, sorry, what were you going to say, Scott?
I was going to say now it's just for anybody who's listening, these nonce checks are good to add, but they are definitely different than the what we had just talked about in the first step, which was
Capability checks.
capability checks. That's what I was trying to get at. So you want to use it as an additional layer, so to say.
Yeah, the nonce checks are definitely not a substitute. We have seen that a lot as well, where the plugin developer will use the nonce as an all-in-one capability in cross-site request forgery protection, which is all well and good if the nonce only ever gets displayed on a place that already has a capability check. But a lot of the vulnerabilities that Chloe has found have been in where the nonce is displayed everywhere, even to people that aren't logged in. Just if anyone has ever actually edited a page for one of them, that wasn't even a cross-site request forgery at that point. I think that was just like a cross-site scripting one because the nonce was so obvious, right?
Yeah, I think that was page layer. I think the nonce was visible on any page that had been edited by page layer. So you could just grab the nonce, and that was what they were using as their capability check. So you could grab the nonce, and then you could send all those requests and XSS pages and all sorts of stuff. So it's very important that you make sure that those nonces aren't discoverable if you're using them. Well, you should be using them. So when you're using them.
Yes, and I mean, I understand that adding nonces to a plugin is a little bit more difficult than adding a capability check, because you have to find some way to only display the nonce to the users that are supposed to see it and not display it to the users that aren't, and generate it per user, or even in some places for like public facing forms, you might have one that's for users that aren't logged in. And I understand that is challenging, but it is totally worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I'm not sure if we're going to screen share the WordPress documentation or not, but we do have that for any viewers who want to check that out and read more into the WordPress nonces. Maybe we can post that into the comments area. And I'm sure we have some examples of this CSRF and the related to issues we found, maybe mistakes with nonce checks. Anything recent?
I think we've got a couple fairly recent ones that Chloe's found.
Yeah, I actually have a post ready. It's going to be released sometime this week on something I found recently that was a cross-site request forgery. So yeah, that'll be coming out this week.
That is nice. Your cue. If you're not currently subscribed to the mailing list, that would be a good reason to subscribe and get notified of that blog post.
Definitely check it out. Whenever Chloe has research comes out, it's always pretty awesome and mind-blowing. So, read it, learn.
And yours is too, Ram.
Oh. Anyways, I'm kind of surprised no one has come up with SameSite Cookies in the chat, because there's this opinion that SameSite Cookies are going to save us all from cross-site request forgery forever. And I'm not going to go too much into what SameSite Cookies are on this live stream, but they're basically a new browser functionality that ensures that any request, incoming request is actually coming from someone who's already on the same site. That link you clicked is a link on the site that you're trying to do something on, and not something that someone sent you in your email. But there is a downside to it, and that's that most SameSite cookies are by default going to be used in what's called the lax configuration, which means that post requests from external locations will be blocked, but get requests will not. And this is mostly for advertising tracking, because otherwise it would completely wreck the entire internet advertising infrastructure. And I have definitely found cross-site request forgery vulnerabilities where they were vulnerable to get parameter requests. So yeah.
Okay, before we move on to number 3, does that about cover the second mistake there?
I
just wanted
think so. Sorry,
I
go
just
on.
wanted to mention, I feel like cross-site request forgery vulnerabilities are kind of underrated. I feel like we should be a little bit more worried about them because there's so many users out there that don't know that clicking on a link can do certain things like sending a request in the background. It's just something that we're not educated about early on when creating WordPress sites and things like that. It's one of those things that you don't really know about. So like if you get a comment on your site and it looks like a legitimate comment and that someone wants to see when it looks like someone wants you to check out their site or something, so they just put a shortened link in there. It's super easy to trick people because they just don't know. So it's one of those things that we really need to share with people about so they know. And one of those things that plugin developers should be taking those steps to protect against, because the impacts these cross-site request forgery vulnerabilities can have is pretty significant. We found remote code execution ones where you could add a code snippet into the site and it'll execute anywhere on the site. So it could add a new administrative user anytime anybody accesses the site anywhere. And then Ram and I have both found a lot of cross-site scripting CSRFs. So basically, you can inject XSS into the while you're exploiting the CSRF. So that JavaScript will get executed as soon as they click the link, and then that can do things like editing theme files and adding administrative user accounts and all sorts of bad things. So it's one of those things that we definitely need to make sure everyone knows about and make sure that we're protecting against, because it can be pretty bad.
Yeah, I do want to add a little bit onto that, just that cross-site request forgery, I think the main reason people don't take it as seriously is because it's not one of those things that's easy to like automatically exploit in bulk. It's not going to be like the file manager vulnerability where, you know, someone sets up a botnet and, you know, attacks 3 million sites and, you know, takes over a third of them, or however many that actually ended up working. But it is one of those things where if you have any sort of high-value site, it's one of those things where, yes, it'll often take some sort of social engineering and spear phishing or something like that, but there's a reminder that those attacks have a really high success rate when they're actually tried. Like, it does take more effort on the part of the attacker, but once the attacker has decided to specifically target you, the success rate is really high.
Yeah.
So
I see we had a general question about nulled themes and asking if they contain viruses, or do they really contain viruses? And that's something, you know, we've talked about a few times. Ram, a pretty high percentage.
So I've seen two kinds of nulled plugins and themes. I have seen nulled plugins and themes where they contain a backdoor or some sort of a built-in SEO spam, where your site is being used to advertise other sites without you knowing it. And I have seen ones where you have to pay a membership fee, and those aren't always infected with viruses, but they are almost always just the free version of whatever it is you're getting that doesn't actually have any of the premium functionality. So either you're paying for the free version or you are installing a backdoor or some kind of like unauthorized content. In fact, in the terms of service of a number of nulled plugin and theme providers, it literally says you agree that we are allowed to make and modify code and content on your site whenever we want. You are literally giving them the permission to change your site whenever. So yeah, if you want to do that, go for it. But please don't go for it. Please don't.
Yeah, definitely not a good way forward. Now, before we get on to the third one here, let's give Ram and Chloe just a second to get ready for that. And we like to take a moment to thank our premium subscribers and especially our viewers here. I know a lot of you are probably premium subscribers. If you're not, you're missing out on the real-time IP blacklist. This is a list of IPs that we monitor and block from visiting your site, block from doing anything on your site, interacting with your content at all, and you do not have to maintain it at all. As soon as you enter your license, your premium license, the blacklist is enabled. And these are IPs that we monitor. We remove them from the list whenever they stop performing the malicious activity, and they get added back if they begin again. Sometimes you might see thousands of brute force attempts in a very short time from these IPs. So they're good to have blocked from your site, and that's an awesome premium feature. Now you can support Wordfence by going premium. It's $99 for a year, and that will also protect a staging or development site as well, or an entire multi-site if you have a multi-site installation. So if you have premium, you can check out in live traffic how many blocks you're getting from the real-time IP blacklist if you filter the results there by blocked and blocked by firewall. Sometimes you may see a lot of blocks there. Also, country blocking, depending on what kind of site you're running, country blocking is awesome to implement just to reduce the number of login attempts that you're seeing, even if nothing else. I typically use it on all of my sites just for the login form. And if you're the only administrator logging in, you can block all other countries from accessing the login form and make it a lot easier. That combined with 2FA and a good complex password, as we've talked many times here in the past, is very good protection. So those are just a couple of the features that we offer. We also offer the premium support where you may talk to either myself or Tim, who is in chat right now answering some questions and helping out. So there is a lot of value there. And of course, you also get these premium firewall rules that Chloe and Ram are putting out very quickly whenever they find these issues in plugins. So let's move on to the third mistake that we see. Did we cover that pretty well, Ram? Second mistake. Chloe, anything to add there?
I think that's about all we can reasonably cover for nonces without actually going too much into the actual implementation. I don't think we actually covered the functions to use it, but realistically, there's a number of ways to do it. I don't think it's realistic to actually go into implementation of nonces without just referencing the dev documents. So yeah.
Yeah, and if anybody's curious about that, you can check that on the WordPress.org site.
Did we post the dev documents? I feel like, or the nonce implementation documents. I feel like we should. Did we?
I don't think we did, but I think we should too.
Okay, yeah, it's in the WordPress codex. Yeah, see if someone can get those posted. Anyways, I guess the last one is kind of number 3, and I don't know if I was kind of torn between number 3 and number 1 for this because both number 1 and number 3 are kind of two sides of the same coin. And number 3 is also something you're going to see in just about every other web application or, application in general. But that's never trust user input. And you might think that user input is, when you say have a form that you want users to submit. Yes, that is user input. But anything a user can alter in any way is user input. Like, let's say that, okay, here's an example that we've actually seen in practice. There are a number of headers request headers like xrealIP and xforwarded4 that are, usable if, let's say, your site is behind a proxy or a CDN. And a lot of plugins will make use of these headers. And it is entirely possible for an attacker to not just pretend to be a different IP by adding in those headers, but to actually put in a cross-site scripting attack as their IP. And if your plugin just naively assumes that whatever it's receiving in that is the IP address and displays it, here's traffic from this IP. Oh, by the way, here's traffic from script, evil script, add new administrator to your site. And we've literally seen this on a couple like traffic logging plugins. So there's other things too. We've seen SQL injection in that. We've seen, if your plugin is processing whatever is in the user's cookies, we've seen attacks where, it'll unserialize whatever is in the user's cookies. And that means that it's vulnerable to object injection because anytime you're unserializing untrusted data, it can lead to object injection. But yeah, most of the time it boils down to cross-site scripting or SQL injection, and the way to really deal with that is to sanitize input. Like for WordPress, there's a fantastic function called WP cases, which is basically a function that lets you it's basically a function that lets you strip out any like dangerous tags while still letting some degree of formatting through. It's basically the filter that Chloe was talking about earlier, that is enabled for contributors and authors, and whereas administrators and editors don't have to deal with that. It's basically the filter that got turned off for that WP Bakery vulnerability. So
Yeah, so it strips out like things like script, but it'll let things like H1 go through. Is that correct?
yeah, and it'll also filter on like on error, on load events. If there's like attribute based cross-site scripting, which is also a big thing, even if you're blocking actual angle brackets. So it's just really super useful. Use it.
Yeah.
For SQL injection, one of the main things you want to do is basically use prepared database statements, and WordPress makes this really easy for you. Like WordPress is just super good at making database prepared statements a lot easier than they are in almost any other raw format. And if you're not going to use that, or actually you should use that in addition to escape SQL, basically escaping whatever is going to go into a database. Doing things like casting anything that is going to be a number to a number, anything that is going to be like a true or false value to a Boolean, that kind of thing.
There are certainly a lot of things for developers and plugin authors to consider with just these three mistakes, but it also sounds like WordPress gives you the tools.
It really does, and I haven't even gotten to escaping output. Sorry, I've been sort of blathering. Go on.
No, I was going to say I have a feeling we are getting to that right now, potentially.
Oh, yeah. So like filtering input is important, but escaping output is just as important. And even if you're not developing for WordPress, if you're developing for any kind of web application, this is super important. Anything that's going to be like displayed to a user, you should do some kind of like escaping or sanitizing. If there's anything that could get a JavaScript value injected in it somehow or another, you don't ever want JavaScript in that, make sure that you're using something like escape HTML on that. So filter and sanitize input, escape output. Those are basically the two major rules that'll make a big difference. And also when it comes to serialized data, it's totally cool to use serialized data internally to your plugin as long as a user cannot at any point ever add their own to it.
Now, we do have a few more links to post if anybody's curious about reading further into this. One of them is what Ram had just talked about with the sanitizing and escaping user data, and we will post that in there, as well as another developer WordPress article that has some good information. Now, as far as user input, what have we found? Have we found anything lately that involved this mistake as far as a vulnerability?
So I don't actually know if I feel like a lot of the ones we've seen are actually basically a combination of this and access control vulnerabilities. In one that I published fairly recently, the PostGrid one, it was partially access control, but also part of it is that, it did let you import custom JavaScript, but it didn't actually display it. What it did let you do was import custom CSS and display that without filtering. So basically, even though, I couldn't actually attack the JavaScript functionality, I could still import scripts into a place they weren't supposed to be, basically the CSS portion of it, and then those would get echoed out to whoever was viewing the template. So,
okay.
But again, that's another case where, number 1 and number 3 are kind of interchangeable. Like if that function had proper access control, I wouldn't have been able to, add cross-site scripting to it. And it's like with Chloe's WP Bakery thing, it took away, it used some access control, but it took away the like filtering.
Yeah. And I think there's been several cases. I don't know any off the top of my head, but where like contact forms have allowed they didn't do any like sanitizing on the input of the contact form, so you can inject XSS. And like Ram mentioned earlier, there's all those like logging ones. I remember when I was doing studies for something, there was a plugin I had to exploit that I had to put the payload in the URL. So basically, the URL didn't do any filtering. So then once someone accessed it in the back end, it would execute the JavaScript and do bad things.
Yeah, there's always something there. Now, you were talking earlier about the attempt where I clicked on the comments that you had sent over, and the administrator user was created. And if anybody's curious about seeing exactly how that can play out and how it works, you can watch that. That was from probably about 2 months ago, I would say, and that'll definitely be in the YouTube channel, so you can see how that is carried out, step by step, and see exactly how and where the administrator user is created, if anybody's curious about seeing that.
We do have an interesting question, which is from Anthony Church, about how he's confused at looking at user input in PHP in general. And so here's the thing. Sanitizing is only useful just before output. So here's the thing. For cross-site scripting, you can deal with it that way, just, accept and store raw data and only filter it on output. But here's the thing. If that information is going into your database, you don't know when someone else might at some point go, oh, hey, let's just output the information in the database. It's one of those things where it's just kind of a best practices thing. If you filter it before it gets stored, you know that what's in the database can go anywhere, even if you forget to escape it on output. And worse yet, if it's not like a cross-site scripting vulnerability, but it's a SQL injection vulnerability, you can't fix that by filtering output. You have to filter the input to prevent SQL injection. Same with object injection. Good
things to know. Now, before I'm going to get on to the swag winners here. Before we move on, I know we have an honorable mention for the list. Before we move on to that, anything to add for the third mistake here?
I don't have anything for the third mistake. Chloe, do you?
Nope, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Okay, so our swag winners, we had 5 correct guesses. We had Steve Day, Tom Morrill, Connor Cahill, Andrea Marcella Fuhrman, and Fritz Barnes won the swag. So as I mentioned earlier, if you get a chance, send us in a picture. We'll put it on the stream here of what you won. It is a mystery. I'm not sure what the swag is this time. We had that winner previously. Very, very cool.
That was Suresh. She's in the chat right now, right?
Yes. Yep.
Cool.
Seeing a lot of familiar names here. We appreciate everybody stopping by. Now, we do have an honorable mention, so this would be sort of a fourth mistake that authors might be making, plugin developers and authors. What do we have for that one?
For that one, I'd say that, yeah, it's just because you don't display a functionality to users doesn't mean that they can't access it. And a lot of this is, again, a sort of the fault of legacy code. Like the newsletter plugin vulnerability I found a couple months back, or one of the more recent vulnerabilities, the WooCommerce product discounts vulnerability. Both of those were cases where, well, actually for the newsletter, I don't even think they display the functionality. Anyways, if someone is looking through your code and they can find a way to trigger something, it doesn't matter if, you actually have a menu that lets a person do that thing legitimately. If the code is there, someone can trigger it. If there's an AJAX hook registered, it doesn't matter if nothing points to it. Someone will reverse engineer what kind of input it wants and figure out how to feed it that input and make it do what they want it to. And Chloe, I think you've had a vulnerability fairly recently where, I don't know if we published that one though, but I know that we've had one fairly recently where, like, a lot of the AJAX actions, there wasn't even a way to get to them for like a real user. They just were there.
Yeah. That is ongoing, but yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not going to talk too much about it then. It's a secret.
Yeah. You'll find out one day.
Definitely something for developers to consider there with having that code and content available. If there is a way, these attackers will sometimes find it, unfortunately.
Exactly. And I mean, hopefully we find it before the attackers do, but someone will find it.
Yes, eventually. Okay, anything to add before we wrap it up here? There was a lot of good information there for developers and just anybody curious. You can relate a lot of that to just general WordPress security practice as well. So a lot of takeaways there.
I feel like I've said all I can on it.
All that you can in 50 minutes at least.
Pretty much.
Okay, well, we got the swag winners there. Congratulations to everybody who won there. We really appreciate everybody stopping by. We had a bunch of people hanging out before we got started today with some questions. We really appreciate you stopping by every week. If you found this stream to be helpful, you can let us know by hitting the like button below the video here, and we'll produce more similar content going forward. You can also hit the subscribe button and hit the bell, and you will be notified when we go live. Now, right now, we go live every Tuesday, and that's at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. So you would get notified for that. We post a few videos here and there to YouTube, walking you through the plugin and different functionality in Wordfence. So you may get a notification here or there for those, but you will not be overwhelmed. As I mentioned earlier, check out the mailing list. Chloe has some stuff coming out. I'm sure Ram soon. We're very active on the mailing list with new issues that we find. And if you're a free user, that can be very valuable for you. If you see anything that you're using, you can get it updated or get it removed right away. Premium users, also good, always knowing what's going on your site as far as security. Again, we really appreciate the support from our premium customers, which allows us to do and make this sort of content. Allows us to have Chloe and Ram and the rest of the Threat Intel team find these issues and keep everybody safe with the blacklist and the premium firewall rules. So we appreciate it a lot. Also services like Wordfence Central, where you can log in wordfence.com/central. If you have an account, you can put all of your Wordfence sites onto the central hub there and monitor your security, whether it's free or premium sites. The service Central is also free, so you can push out templates to all of your sites. We have users with hundreds of sites added to Central, and it just makes it easy to log in and view all of your site's security in one place. So that's something to consider as well. If you have any settings that you want to set on all of your sites rather than logging into each one individually, you can do that right from Wordfence Central. So that's another awesome thing that we have out there, such as well as fast or slow. Ram did a lot of testing on fast or slow, and we had an episode recently that detailed fast or slow, and it was really cool to do. We're going to be doing another one, so if you have a site right now that's ready to go, you can head over to fast or slow and put your site URL in there and get the speed profiled and see what your site is doing and how well it's loading for your visitors. There's a lot of information on there. Okay, open.film. Ram, you watched open.film, right? The awesome short film that we had.
Yes, it's about the WordPress community and basically what a wonderful place it is. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's a fun little film. If you haven't been to a WordCamp, if maybe you're new to WordPress, you get some cool interviews in there. See the people that are behind the product there, and it really shows off the vibe of the WordPress community, and that's what you get out of our WordCamps as well, which we're very excited to get back to. In the meantime, we appreciate everybody stopping by, and we will be back next Tuesday with some more security content. So we appreciate it, everybody. Any last words, Ram, Chloe?
Thank you all for watching. You've been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.